Hey, welcome to session 2 of our parenting seminar, and we want to start talking about training our children. So I've got a few verses I'm going to read first. So Matthew 28 verses 18 through 20 says, "And Jesus came and said to them, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." Proverbs 22 verse 6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." Proverbs 22 verse 15 says, "Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him." And then Proverbs 20 verse 11 says, "Even a child makes himself known by his acts, by whether his conduct is pure and upright."
So Jesus is very clear about the mission that he's given us. He sends us to disciple all people groups, and a lot of times we can miss the disciples that are right under our noses. But our kids are our first disciples, and it is like discipling anyone. It is, or like being discipled, it is both challenging and takes a very long time, takes consistency, and we really need a big picture. It's the thing that I know and that we hear a lot of is just the mundaneness that kind of sets into parenting. And one of the things that has really encouraged me over the years is just looking at the daily ins and outs of wiping noses and changing diapers and doing the dishwasher for the 80th time, whatever it might be, is actually seeing those things as worship to God, that as we are faithful with the small things, with our children, that is worship to him, because it's what he's given us. And so our faithfulness blesses him and honors him, and he wants to meet us in those times. That the amazing thing about training your children is that God uses it to train us as parents and to draw us closer to himself. So this is the Great Commission in its finest hour, because it's the easiest one to pass up. Our children need us to guide them and train them, and it is a very slow process. And one of the notes I wrote here, it says, "Parenting is the Great Commission at its finest and most opportune moment that we will ever been given." And as we go through this training process, our hope is that our words will inspire you while you're dealing with poopy diapers, when you're dealing with bad attitudes, when you're enjoying tickle fights, when you're having embarrassing public tantrums, which we have had many of, when you're having a crazy after dinner dance party, in the calm after the storm, the going to bed storm, the calm that follows that, just the joy that our kids bring to us, the millionth time out, the sweet notes and little kisses. That parenting is truly a marathon. It is not a sprint, and we need Jesus to be our big picture, not our children to be our big picture. So that's why we're reading these verses. That's why we're looking at the Great Commission, because Jesus has to be our big picture in parenting. He's the reason we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, and one example I thought of to share is actually, I think of Heather and just the years that her parents took to train her and to raise her, and to raise her to follow God and to develop character in her very intentionally. And now, God's called us to be in Chicago to start a church, and we've been here several years doing that. And so all the hard work, all those early years as well, but all the work through her whole childhood, I think about for her, like now her life is impacting people in this, you know, in this world-class city, that you know, all the nations are here, and it's a humbling thing to think about. But you know, they had no idea that investing in her would bring her to this place. But now her life is impacting so many other people. So we want to, I think Heather's point is, we want to keep that in real perspective, that the mundane, everyday training of our young children, we have no idea how God will use their life in the future to affect people. And so the goal of training is to help our children leave behind foolishness and to leave behind immature thinking and immature acting as well. So they will leave those things behind. And we've got to understand that children are naturally disobedient and naturally immature. Okay, I hope we all know that. As a parent, that should be pretty obvious. Children are naturally that way. And the Bible praises children, though, for their levels of trust and faith. It praises them for that. But it warns us about their foolishness. And when sometimes the Bible talks about foolishness, it will talk about it in childish terms. And so we can't be blind to that. We can't miss that. So I want to move on to this next section here. We want to talk about authority. And authority, as we know, you know, God has authority over us. God is our parent, and we are His children. And God instills authority in us as parents so that we can train our children. And because God makes us parents, God blesses us with children, that means we have authority to train and to develop our kids. Now, having authority as a parent doesn't mean that we have all knowledge, doesn't mean we have all power, but it does mean we have complete responsibility. And we actually have responsibility to grow our knowledge. So if we lack the skills of parenting, which most people do, most people are not probably natural born parents. Maybe if some few exceptional people naturally know what to do. Most people, including myself, I had to very much have had to and am still learning how to be a parent.
Me too.
I think that's probably true for most people. That's true. We have the complete responsibility to say, I don't have all knowledge, I don't have all power, but I have been given authority. Therefore, I've got to learn. I've got to grow into this. And you know, no one else, when our kids are throwing a tantrum or they're disobeying, no one else is going to show up knocking on our door saying, I'm here to discipline your children, or I'm here to train your children for you. I'm here to develop them and make them turn out excellent. It's on us. We are it. We are the ones that God has given the authority to. And when you have true authority, it kind of means that you should be able to be left unsupervised and you would still act in accordance with the authority you've been given. And so that's what God expects of us. God delegates authority to us. Obviously, all children are God's children, right? But God specifically gives us the responsibility to train our kids. I think back to a few years back where a friend of mine, where our boys were young and rambunctious, and I had to address something. They were squabbling or something was going on. I don't remember exactly what was going on, but I had to address them directly, correct their behavior, correct their attitudes, have them, you know, work out whatever was going on, and give them a consequence for that. And I had to be, you know, loving about it, but very firm and direct. And he pulled me aside afterwards and he said, I've never seen a parent talk that way to their children before. And I was, you know, you kind of get used to doing stuff, and we've been doing that for a few years at that point. But it made me realize, I thought, I didn't used to know how to do that. Like, he made the point, I've never seen anyone do that before. And I thought to myself, I probably hadn't seen anyone do that before, but I had to go and learn. I had to go and find out, how do I do that? And so there are skills of authority to learn. We must be extremely careful, though, not to abuse our authority. We can't abuse our authority. We're not to exasperate our children, as the Bible teaches us. So we don't want to be overbearing or too strict in what we do. We want to be like our Heavenly Father. So God as Father is the best example of parenting, and He has gracious authority. So He doesn't ever abdicate His authority, but He has gracious authority. And that means as people, we're to be bold, we're to be decisive, we're to be firm. But it means we're also to balance that with being calm, being loving, and being patient. And we've got to realize that our authority is not given to us for our convenience and because we're important. Sometimes that's the danger, that's the misconception of authority, is like, I just get to call the shots to make my life easier. And so that's oftentimes where we get overbearing. I know I can easily fall into that. I get, you can be too strong exercising authority because it's more about convenience and what you want kids to do and not do, or because of self-importance. That can happen as well. But our authority is given to us to develop mature people in the world. This is the Great Commission. So we've been given authority to develop, to make disciples, so that there will be mature people in the world doing the works of God in the world. And this means we've got to balance this authority with a sense of enjoying life and being gracious and being loving. Then the next thing that Heather and I are going to talk about together is observation, making observation of our children. So right along with authority, the outworking of authority is, as parents, we have to actually watch our kids. Like, we have to observe them, which means we've got to pay close attention to what they're doing. And I will say this, observation is really hard work. Mm-hmm. It's exhausting to do, but it cannot be avoided. You cannot avoid this, okay? Especially dads, all right? Dads, you cannot avoid this. I've tried to avoid this, but it can't be avoided. Without decent observation, what will happen is our training of our children will be inconsistent. So they'll hear different things from us at different times because we're not really paying attention to what they're doing. It will be frustrating to them. And the most dangerous thing is that it's wrong. That the instruction we give them is wrong simply because we actually don't know what they're saying or doing, or we're not paying attention to the situation. And I would say personally, this has been one of the hardest aspects of parenting for me. Heather is excellent at being observant and watching our children. And this is different. We're not talking about being a helicopter parent who's like constantly hovering over their kid. We're not talking about that, constantly guiding their every move. Obviously, children have to be able to do things wrong that we observe in order for us to train them. So we can't be constantly controlling them to avoid all possible chances of them hurting themselves or doing anything wrong. We can't be doing that. But this for me was so hard because I'd say in social situations, obviously I'm a church leader, so at church and other social situations, other kind of meetings, if our kids are there, it's so hard for me sometimes. If I'm focused on a conversation, I'm focused on a situation, or I'm stuck in my head thinking about something, and our kids are over here screaming or doing something, and I'm oblivious to it. And but it's because I've been given authority. It is my responsibility to actually tune into them and start paying attention and figuring out what are they doing and how do I respond to that. We also need to be observant in order to praise our children and to build them up and to encourage them. Our kids need that so much from us. As parents, we're always saying, no, stop, don't do that. And that's pretty common when they're young. But if they don't hear those loving words from us, it's really dangerous. And so we've got to observe in order to bring life-giving words that say, I'm so proud that you did that. I noticed that. I see you improving in this area, whatever it may be. Because what you'll find is as you reinforce those things, you'll get more of it. As you encourage those things, kids will want to do more of those things. So that's kind of introduction to observation.
So things that you want to be looking out for, and some of these are really obvious. You might not, depending on how many kiddos you have or what their ages are, you may or may not have come in to contact with these, but arguing with siblings or arguing with you, back talking, hitting or biting, which I was a biter and our oldest was a hitter. So
when you were a kid, you were a biter, right?
Yeah. When I was a kid. Looking out for sockets and electrical cords, looking out for knives and scissors depending on their age, running away from you when you're telling them to come here. Again, a lot of this is probably 5 and under, it's really intense. It's really intense between, I would say, the time they start walking to 3 to 4, depending. Disobedience, disrespect, lying, which tends to happen a little bit later. I would say older than 3 or 4. Being unkind, whining, your tone is a massive. We say to our kids a lot, your words are fine, your tone is awful. Well, we don't say awful, but your tone needs to change. We say your words are fine, you need to choose a different tone. And then your obvious ones like throwing fits, throwing a tantrum. Something that's been really helpful to us, PJ Smythe has a small parenting booklet, I believe, and he talks about the 3 Ds, which are disobedience, disrespect, and danger, that those are 3, kind of a very succinct way of giving a umbrella of what you're wanting to look out for and address, as far as helping them and guiding them to safety.
Yep.
A lot of these do have to do with safety.
Yeah. We've got the responsibility to protect our children from danger.
Yeah.
So that leads us on to proactive training. So this idea of authority, we've been given the absolute responsibility to look after our kids and train and develop them. They can't figure it out themselves. It's up to us. And then this idea of observation is important. And then we want to, so then now after we've observed and we've seen they're doing things that we can praise, but they're also doing things that need to be corrected, things that they need to change. So now we're moving into proactive training. And I've got 2 verses here. Exodus 20 verse 12 says, honor your father and your mother, and your days may be long. That your days may be long in the land, and that the Lord your God is giving you. And then Colossians 3:23 through 24. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ.
So the idea of proactive training is, rather than always reacting to what your children are doing, it's kind of taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, and practicing and addressing things before they happen. Or if you've seen something that is a troublesome area for your child, it's like, okay, we're going to practice that. So various things that we have tried are, a big one is practicing things ahead of time. So a big one, when your kids start walking around, if you find yourself going to your friends' houses and removing all of their breakables to higher shelves, we had to do that. And so I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to be able to take our kids to someone's house and not have to move anything. So we would practice. We had a couple of glass candlesticks or candle holders on some coffee tables, and I would put Jones there, and he could stand and walk really early, so he was maybe like 11 months, 12 months old, and I would say to him, do not touch. And as soon as he would start to put his hand, I would grab his hand and pull it back and say, eyes only, do not touch. And we do that a lot. And if he did touch it, I would give him a little swat on the hand. Nothing terrible, just enough for him to realize that was a no-no. Just for your eyes, not for your hands. And we would do that with breakables. We would do that with electrical outlets, anything that was dangerous. And we'd also redirect them. So that's another, like, you're going this way, I'm going to pick you up and help you to go a different direction, to run away from temptation. So just practicing those things. Let's see. One of the things we would use a lot is self-control arms and patient hands. So we've had a few of our kiddos be very grabby and giving them things to do. So Paisley, our oldest girl, she just wants to touch and grab and get. And so self-control hands, we put our hands here, and just by giving them a tool helps them so much. It's not going to fix every problem, but it's going to help some. And then self-control arms. Those are things that we do, and they're getting kind of crazy. Self-control arms. There were some days where, like, okay, Jones is not coming to me whenever I call him, so we're going to stay at home for the next 3 days, and that's the only thing that we are going to do, is we're going to practice coming, and when he comes, we're going to celebrate, and when he runs away, he's going to have a consequence of some sort. Those days are rough, but they really pay off and help you to both exercise authority and also celebrate your child as they make progress. And then role playing has been another really fun one that we have done. So one of our kids really is not a shy personality, but felt very shy at church. And so we'd say, okay, hi, how you doing? And then, I'm our friend Rachel. Hi, how are you? Because even from friends, she would tend to shy away. So, and then what do you say? And that giving her courage to respond in a loving way to our friends.
Yeah, we'll have several rules or a few rules for the restaurant, and so kind of inside voice, no running around, stay in your chair, things like that, kind of obvious things. But before we get into the restaurant, we'll say, what are our rules? And they have to repeat the rules to us. And then we say, what are the consequences for breaking the rules? So they know that, and that just becomes a habit. And then if you're in a similar context, maybe it's not a restaurant, but it's like a restaurant, you can tell them, hey, this is like being in a restaurant. So what are we going to apply? We're going to do restaurant rules in this place. So you've already created that framework. So all these examples here are proactive training. We are intentionally shaping how our children behave and how they think about treating other people, how they act around other people, because they represent our family.
Our boys are 14 months apart, and people told me if I got through the first 6 months, I'd be fine, and that was a total lie. Their children must be a bit more passive, I guess. But we have all 4 of our kids are strong-willed, and I say if you're going to grow up in the city, you got to have a strong will. So we're going to redirect that versus squash that. That's the goal. But the boys were 1.5 and 2.5 basically, and I felt like I was living in timeouts. And this is where the rubber really meets the road as far as proactive training, doing what you say you are going to do. So Jones, our oldest, he was my tantrum thrower, and anytime we would go to someone's house, I would say to him, if you throw a fit while we were at so-and-so's house, we will leave. And multiple times that happened, and I had to go visit friends saying, if he throws a fit, I have to leave, because that's what I've told him I'm going to do. And at that time, we had been in Chicago barely any time at all, like a few months, and so I was trying to make friends. But I also knew that as far as the long term goes, that was going to be a really important investment. One story that always sticks out in my mind is both of our boys loved the Thomas trains, and we had found a Barnes & Noble that had a Thomas train all set up, and we'd go. That's what we do on rainy days. And so they're probably 3 and 2 at this point, and I said to them, boys, we're going to play here for a little while, and when it's time to go, you need to say, yes, Mama, and we need to go. And they, yes, Mama. And so we're playing, and I give them the fair warning. 5 minutes, we're going to go bye-bye. Yes, Mama. 2 minutes, we're going to go bye-bye. Yes, Mama. 1 minute. And when I said, boys, it's time to go, both of them fell on the floor crying. And I had to potato sack both of them. And this train table was on the top floor of this Barnes & Noble, so I had to walk through the entire store, down the stairs with both boys. Ah! And I just said I had to whisper it into their ears because they couldn't hear me over the screaming, but I just said, this is a no-no, and you're getting a consequence when we get home. And I had to carry them out and strap them into the stroller and walk home with them screaming. And so it's not an easy thing, but I would say if I can encourage you at all, whether we've, again, had all 4 very strong-willed children, I would do it over again in a heartbeat because they are such a joy now.
We also want to be giving rewards, right? So when kids do things well, we do want to honor that. But I do want to warn as well. We got to be careful about lacking grace, really, with over-the-top reward systems, and take that too far. Kids also should be able to, the reward of their parents' affirmation and high five should also be a great reward. Sometimes we can be so nervous about, we've read some kind of study or we heard something one time, and we have this, I'm going to screw up my kid if I don't do something this way. And if we love our kids, if we have a loving relationship and we're stable people and we love God and we're following God and we love our kids and we're willing to admit our mistakes to them and seek their forgiveness when we need to, like, they're going to turn out pretty good. And so all of this stuff is just adding to all that as well. So we do want to move on, though, actually, and talk about discipline. So we talk about authority, observation, then proactive training, and that involves then discipline of our kids. So Proverbs 3:11 through 12 says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be wary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves him who he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights."
And really, it doesn't feel this way, but it is unloving to not discipline your children. Did I say that right? Disciplining your children in the long run helps you to delight in them. Discipline brings security to them, that they know that they can trust us, that it is so important that we do what we say we are going to do. I read a really helpful book when Jones was about 2, and when a child is between 18 months and 36 months, the way the brain is actually physically developing is to test. And so when you say one thing and then you do another thing, or you do something one time but not the next time, we actually train their physical brains to distrust those circumstances. So it is super important that we do what we say we are going to do. I shared the story about the temper tantrum. That was really common with Jones, and after we've put in the hard work, I mean, he is such a joy, and he doesn't believe when we tell him stories of when he was 2. He doesn't believe that he did those things. I mean, there were so many times, "Jones, come here," and he'd stick his chubby little finger at us and go, "No, no, 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 no," and he would just run the other way. And I mean, I felt like we just lived in the discipline phase with him for the longest time. But he's such a delight now. So consistency is the number one thing that builds trust, and it is a decision every single day to be consistent, and sometimes moment by moment. It consists of being accountable with your partner in crime, and if you are a single parent, having someone you can call to be like, "I'm really struggling to not be consistent," or "I'm really having a hard time with this area." Like, accountability is incredibly important to receive feedback, how we're operating with our kids, because there are phases of life, seasons in life where you're more drained, so you're responding out of irritability, especially if you have lots of little children. Being able to take breaks, taking over for one another, like, "I'm feeling really angry, can you deal with this?" That type of thing. So consistent discipline really means making inconvenient choices for the sake of training your child. It means laying down, talking to your girlfriends or talking to your guy friends, or in social settings. It means that your children really are the thing at the top of your mind, whatever situation you're in. And again, this is probably for 5 and under, for where it's the most intense.
So we want to go on to types of discipline. If you've got notes there, I think you have a list of these. But just to say on one aspect of what Heather was talking about, getting feedback on how you're interacting with your kids and how you are being consistent with your kids, because it's so easy. Like, I would hear stuff on parenting, I'd read parenting books, or I'd hear something and I'd say, "Oh, that's so good," or "That makes so much sense," or "Yeah, I'm doing that." But it wasn't until I actually had people observe me and give me real-time feedback on what I was doing and saying that I suddenly realized, like, I'm not doing this the way that I thought I was, or the way that I had read about it. I actually needed that hands-on. Maybe I'm just not very bright, I don't know, but I needed direct feedback, which is harder. It's not as fun. Yeah, because it's because you're like, I'm trying to deal with my children, but it's like, really our ability to train our children really comes down to what's in our own hearts. It's not about them. It's really about, can we, deal with our own stuff and grow into this. So children need discipline, right? We read this verse from Proverbs 3 that God disciplines us. Discipline is good. God brings difficulty into our lives to train us. So as Christians, when we face difficulty or we go through something hard, the best question we can ask ourselves is, what is God teaching me through this? What is God teaching me through this? And so as parents, we've got to bring consequences into our kids' lives, not maliciously, not to get them back, but to develop that character that they need to understand this is right and this is wrong. So this first one, so now these, we've got to explain these well, because there's going to be very different philosophies of parenting behind these things. Whatever you end up deciding to do with disciplines, you got to be, what Heather said, you got to be consistent at it. And so you may not see eye to eye on some of these things, and that's okay. The key is that you're whatever you do, you're consistent, and you'll actually see pretty good success and pretty good fruit with just consistency in and of itself. So again, I just encourage you, try and be open-minded to this. If you have a very different philosophy of parenting, just try and be open-minded to some of these. The first type of discipline that we started using was around 6 to 8 months old. It's kind of, that was the earliest we did it. And this would happen, I remember this specifically, changing diapers with some of our kids, and they would start kicking us, okay? And I just thought, I don't know what they're doing, they're just being a kid, just being a little baby, they're just whatever. But then we came to realize, like, this is actually a bad attitude. This is a tantrum type thing. They're kicking us in this way, and this is even at this young age, this is an outworking of, as obviously followers of Jesus, we believe that sin is in the human heart, right? So even at that young age, like, this is a rebellious outburst in a very small way, but they're kicking us, and that's unacceptable. So something we would do, this is very small, very minor. We do a little pop on the face, a little flick on the cheek, okay? Very minor. It's not inflicting. It's not, torture or anything like that. Very little quick pop on the cheek. And what we'd find would happen is it would stun them for a second, and they'd be like...
They wouldn't even know what happened.
They didn't even know it was us. They'd be like, something just happened to me. And sometimes they would cry for a moment. But being consistent, and maybe you're laughing about that, but being consistent on that actually stopped them from lashing out and kicking us, which is then, from a very early age, training them, this is unacceptable behavior. Then another thing, probably a similar time, similar age that we would do in a similar situation, up to about...
more to 8 months, 8 to 10 months.
Yeah, 8 to 10 months. And then, but that thing on the flick on the face, and then this next one, which is kind of a hand or a thigh swat, up to 2 years old, we wouldn't really do it beyond that. But that's, like Heather mentioned it earlier on, just a swat to the hand or to the thigh, depending on what the situation is.
Because they're going for a light socket, or...
Yeah, exactly.
They're kicking you, and it's...
This is something undesirable, something that's dangerous for them, or something that is socially unacceptable. It's not out of... They're inconveniencing me. I'm frustrated with them. This is never done in anger. If you're angry, never do this. Okay, that's why, actually, one of the great things you can do, leaning on your spouse. So there's been times where I've said to Heather, I'm furious right now at this child. I need you to discipline them because I'm just angry. Or she's done the same thing with me. She said, I need you to deal with them right now. And then the calm parent can step in. And if you're a single parent, you just have to wait until you calm down and try and give them the consequence later on. But when we're doing these kind of disciplines, they have to cause enough discomfort in our children that they learn this is undesirable. Okay, so it can't be so light that it's ineffective, but also we're not doing anything abusive or anything mean-spirited to our kids. We do this because we love them, and because we're training them to discern what is good and what is bad. This third one is something that we would do on our kids when they were kind of toddlers, when they're running around. This is especially helpful if you're in public and you just don't have the opportunity to be doing bigger consequences or things like that. But we'll do what I lovingly call the ear grip, and this is where you can just kind of
kind of almost pinch their earlobe very quickly, just kind of a quick pinch on it, and quick pinch and even a twist on it, depending. But again, this is not done in frustration. This is to correct undesirable and bad behavior in the children and in your children. And it's kind of one of the things that's like, it shocks them, but they know those kind of things are coming if you're consistently doing those things. And we didn't, our goal was to do these kind of things every time. Did we do it every time? We didn't do it every time. We wish we'd done it every time, but we're not perfect, so we couldn't do it every time. But the more we can do this as parents, the more helpful it is to our children. Now these kinds of disciplines are for serious things. Like we want our kids to not run into the road and get run over. So that's what it's way better to get a little pinch on the earlobe, which they'll recover from in like 30 seconds later. They'll be fine, totally fine. And they're not going to hate you forever. Our kids absolutely love us and adore us. I would rather they feel a little discomfort on their earlobe than they run into the street and get run over by a car. Section 4 is to spank or not to spank. So I wanted to tackle this one to do the separate section in this video about spanking because it is a controversial subject matter. We've got 6 subpoints here. So the first one is to make a wise judgment about the topic of spanking. Understanding that it is illegal in some countries and some states in America. There are mixed studies on the subject, and there's appropriate criticism over all kind of studies to do with this topic. There are some studies that say it's the worst thing you could ever do for a child, or some studies say actually it really helps children. And there's criticism about the methodology behind all of those studies. But according to current statistics, the majority of parents still spank their children. So this is an important topic. It can't be ignored. But the first point is we got to make a wise judgment. And what I mean by that is you got to consider, what does it mean to spank a child? What does somebody mean by that? Some people take it to one extreme. They think it sounds like beating and it's abuse, and that's one extreme. The other extreme is, or the parents are thinking, or people are thinking, kids need to get a good whooping sometimes. And we have different, and we mean different things when we use these terms as well, and people have different experiences. So we want to try and scrub out all of our opinions and ideas behind it and get to what do we mean by these phrases. So we've got to make a wise judgment, which takes time. So as a parent, that means you've got to take time to read up on this, to study this, and figure out what's helpful and what's not helpful. Point 2 under this is that no consequence, whatever it is, no consequence should ever be given in anger, whether it's whether we're giving a physical thing, some kind of physical discipline, or taking away a privilege or something like that. Even timeouts, even we're sending a child to timeout, should never be done in anger. Having a loving family is the key to effective discipline and to having healthy children. Point 3 is that the bigger the discipline is, so the more serious the discipline is, and obviously something like spanking would, in a child's mind, be extremely a serious thing. But for all disciplines, the bigger it is, it should be reserved for the biggest offenses. And we should resist kind of thoughtless, automatic, and excessive forms of discipline. Sometimes we get into a rut. We just always respond with, we just always, we always get the cannon out. We always bring out the biggest weapon we can to just blast away because we think that's what's gonna solve this problem, and that's very thoughtless and careless. So the bigger the discipline has to be reserved for a bigger offense. And I'm so glad that Heather and I have been diligent or we've attempted to be diligent to consistently discipline our children, and especially reserve, things that pertain to more dangerous situations, to discipline our kids for it. Because, if a kid's running away from you, they won't listen to you, they're rejecting your counsel, whatever it is. It's dangerous for kids. And we actually had a situation where we, because training our children to stop when we say stop, to come to us when they come to us, those kind of things, they're issues of safety. If a child's ever in a dangerous situation and you want them to stop what they're doing or come to you, they need to be able to obey and respond right away for their own safety, for their own life. And we had a situation not too long ago
where I was crossing a parking lot. I was carrying Finley, our youngest, and the older three were with Heather, or at least I thought they were all with Heather. Turns out Paisley, our 5-year-old, actually was running after me. I didn't realize this, and so I'm crossing the parking lot. She runs out of a store. She's about to run into the parking lot, and there's a car coming. Heather notices this and shouts to her, "Stop!" And she stopped right on the edge, and the car was able to go by. And I tell you, it's so important that, you know, kids experience some level of discomfort when they disobey those kind of commands. Otherwise, they won't learn. We've got to realize, you know, children, you can't reason with a small child. You know, we sometimes get into these dialoguing conversations. We're trying to use logic and reason. A child's brain is not developed in that way. When they're younger, they can't understand reason. They have to experience discomfort and some, you know, level of discomfort in order to associate this is bad behavior, this is undesirable behavior. And even a proactive training game you can play with your kids is a game of stop and go, just playing a game, stop, go, and it's kind of a fun thing to do. Subpoint number 4 under this is to consider your child's uniqueness, but be careful to watch any unreasonable overprotection or excuse making for your child. So not all disciplines are suitable for all children. Most probably are. Most children, you know, are going to be fine with most forms of discipline, but every so often you might have a unique situation where because of trauma, because of behavioral thing, you know, there might be some kind of behavioral disorder or something, that some forms of discipline may not be appropriate, and you need to make a wise judgment about that. But what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't make excuses for your child. Okay, if done well, all these forms of discipline are going to help most children, but in some situations there may be kids it may not be helpful for, but don't be the parent that's making excuses, that's being overprotective and just excusing their child's behavior. Don't be that parent, but yet consider your child's uniqueness. Number 5, children need a healthy balance of firm boundaries and rich engagement. Firm boundaries and rich engagement. Okay, so that means we're building a rich, engaging relationship with them, but it also means we're not weak when it comes to discipline. We create firm boundaries, we follow through with discipline, and the greater the offense that the child commits, the greater the consequence and discipline needs to be that they received. Always done in love, never done in anger. And then lastly, point 6, I want all parents to read this Time Magazine article about spanking, okay? And very interesting article. You've got the link there in your notes. Very helpful article. It talks about this issue, and obviously Time Magazine's a well-respected publication. What's interesting in there is they have some then specific methodology around spanking children that I think we would be wise to make a wise judgment about this subject matter, would be wise to review that content, to carefully consider that content in light of the other things that we've shared, and to consider, is this, how can we implement this as a family?
And then getting back to our main list, the 5th type of discipline is putting a kid in their crib or their pack and play. So this is something we did. If they're throwing a fit, spanking can be very difficult in that kind of situation because they're out of control. So the best thing we found to do is put them in their crib or in a pack and play and say, I'm going to come back in once you've calmed down. And then you wait outside the door and you're listening to them. And as soon as they calm down, the very split second that they stop crying, you go in and you celebrate them. You say, good job, you calm down, you're getting control of yourself. And if they start crying again immediately, you say, oh, I'm going to have to come back, unless you can calm down. And you give it a second. If they still can't calm down, you say, I'm going to go out and come back once you've calmed down. So you repeat that. But once then they calm themselves down, then you can get them. That's the consequence was being put in the crib. Okay, then you take them out and you continue whatever it is you were doing. Number 6 is timeouts. Timeouts can be great, especially if something else is happening they want to be involved in and they're missing out on it. It's a great thing for them to experience the disappointment of that. That will train them to change what they're doing. But I would say one of our children actually could do timeout all day long. He can just sit there and is not bothered. He's just totally fine. So number 7 is removing privileges. That can be figured out. Basically, find the thing your kid loves the most and take it away from them.
Dessert.
Yeah, whatever it is, take it away from them. Different for different kids. Number 8, this is Heather's example here, is putting their toys in timeout, depending on their age. So now your toys are in timeout. Number 9 is taking dessert away. She just said that. And number 10 is taking away screen time. So video games, playing on iPhones, iPads, whatever it might be, watching TV. Taking that away can be disastrous. Not that children should be doing too much of that anyway, but taking that away is a sad thing because they love it so much. And then lastly, finishing up, we want to talk about how to discipline.
So you want to set the expectations with one another. Decide as a couple, or if you're a single person, it's always helpful to decide that with someone you trust, and then give really clear instructions to your children. I think as parents, warnings can be given out the wazoo, and you only give warnings if they're old enough to understand, and it's not a first time offense. So our 5, 8, and 9-year-old do not get any warnings anymore. They're old enough to know. Recent example, we were at Christmas time, we spent at my parents' house, and they don't lock their garage door that goes to their garage, and we live in the city, so every door that goes to the outside we lock, and so our kids are very used to locking doors. So we had to practice with Paisley, because she was just in the habit. I shut this outside door and I lock it. So those newer situations that you have to explain, especially if they're a little bit younger, and then you give a consequence when the offense has been made. You do it. And then one of the things that we have found really helpful is to redo the situation once it's over in the correct way, and then you express your love and comfort the child, and tell them that you love them. Mama disciplines you because I love you. I want to help you grow, and so it's all done on most days in love and patience.
Yep. And then lastly, some basic instructions at a young age for our kids. So number 1, we can give simple commands to our children. Stop, sit down, no, stay there. Those are simple commands. And obviously, if they're not able to obey those things, then there are consequences for that. Number 2, these should be given with eye contact, and physical touch is good, so that we're really engaging with our children. We're not just in a different room shouting and ranting at them, but like we're proactively there training them. Number 3, we should use a normal voice with them. We don't want to go into some kind of patronizing counseling voice, nor do we want to go into some crazy voice. And number 4, we want to make a conscious effort not to end sentences with, is that okay?
Okay.
Or okay? We're not reasoning with our children. One thing we learned is to say, if our kids, if we say do this, or come here, stop, and they back talk to us, the simplest response is, what did I tell you? And if they can't tell you, then they have a consequence for that, because they're not listening. So whether that's timeout, or whether that is they lose a privilege, whatever you want to do, up to you. Obviously that's not a serious, depending on what they're doing. We wouldn't have spanked for that, because that's not serious. No. But we want to make a conscious effort to not dialogue and not be like telling them something and saying okay, no, this isn't a discussion. We have the authority. It's your job to obey. And
that would, wouldn't you say that would be like probably 6 and under or 7 and
yes.
under? The biggest concern is do what I say. And what we've tried to say, because we don't want to kill the question, so our thing is obey, and then if you have a question, come back to me and you can ask, why did you want me to do that, or can you explain this to me? But obey first, discuss later.
Yeah. And so lastly then, commands should be given once and then enforced. So we don't keep repeating, basically. So that's the end of this session.
Hooray!